Okay, what is this? Take 67?
75.
Lost count. Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Beard and this is my colleague Kate Coombes.
Hello.
Hi, and we own a company called Peas in the Pod Consulting. We provide outsourced HR support to local businesses of all shapes and sizes, and was really excited when we were asked to present today because the subject of remote working or agile working is a very on-trend subject in the world of HR at the moment. Yes, given the current climate and everything that's currently going on, but it was before 2020 happened. Home working or remote working is deemed to be the kind of the future of the world of work, and there are a number of contractual and legal considerations that a business owner would really need to think about before making a decision to move to a remote working based practice. So we're going to run through a few of those with you today, if we can get the techie bit right.
We're not known for our tech prowess.
No, we're not.
Okay. Hopefully you can see that screen.
Okay.
And I'm going to remove us.
Awesome. Okay.
There we go. Okay, so whilst home working is perceived as a dream for many employees, it can be quite difficult for managers, leaders, business owners to come to grips with it. It can be really easy to start feeling a sense of lost control, and finding a level of trust with a remote team can be quite a challenge. But even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we were starting to realise that it is the future of the global workplace. And as such, leaders do need to be really proactive to adapt and make the situation workable for all concerned. And actually, we really believe that when they do that, they'll see the benefits that home working can realise for them. Okay, there we are. Success with the first slide. So this slide just outlines some of those advantages. The main one, or the most attractive one to most business owners, is obviously the ability to control and reallocate office space. And that reduces overhead significantly. But more than that, this can really assist with staff recruitment and retention and overall increased productivity. And employees themselves really benefit from the increased flexibility and job satisfaction that a better work-life balance brings for them. But we have to tackle some of the attitudes to home working. And despite the undeniable benefits of encouraging working from home, many organisational leaders struggle with the idea of allowing employees so much autonomy. Some managers believe that an employee's effectiveness depends on a number of hours spent at work. This is known as presenteeism, managing by presence. But the frightening reality is that presenteeism is 12 times as harmful to business productivity as absenteeism. So people are there, but not really there. It makes it harder to spot and weed out. We know that working long hours, lengthy commutes, and poor leadership practices such as micromanagement all contribute to employee disengagement, and that's the reason it's so harmful. So for home working to be really effective, managers and leaders have got to change this mindset and focus on supporting employees in performing their tasks. It's really important to manage expectations for everyone concerned and stay focused on goals, not activity, when embracing a remote working environment. It's important not to worry so much about what's being done, but instead concentrate on what's being accomplished, about meeting goals and focusing on output, not hours worked. That said, we'd be naive to think there weren't some disadvantages to home working, and we're hopefully going to cover how these can be mitigated as we go through how effective HR process supports home working and mitigates these disadvantages that you can see in front of you.
Okay, let's start with $1 million question that's been asked of me a number of times in recent months, and that is, do employees have the right to request home working? Now, the answer to that is covered through it's covered by a flexible working procedure, which every employer should have within their organisation. And I think this is going to come up quite a lot with employers who have transferred their employees to home-based working through this pandemic period. Employees, they've enjoyed predominantly from from what I've read, have enjoyed the working from home experience and may well feel reluctant or a desire to return to their place of work. And employers may well then start to see an increase in flexible working requests submitted to request home-based working. Okay, so how do you deal with a flexible working request? Well, first of all, we're looking at eligibility here. So an employee that has at least 26 weeks continuous service with you has the right to request flexible working. So an application for flexible working is an application for effectively a permanent variation to an employee's key T's and C's. And that could be related to hours, time, or in this instance that we're referring to, place of work. And employers have to take that request seriously and consider it in a reasonable manner. And there is a process by which to do that, which should be dictated within your own policy. The policy should dictate a number of information requirements that the employee is required to submit as part of the request. And your policy should also dictate the way an employer responds and makes a decision in relation to that request. A request can either be granted, in which case you then move on to the detail behind how and when those changes will be implemented, or it could be rejected. And business owners should take into account if they are planning on rejecting a flexible working request to move to home-based working, they need to reject that request on a number of legally specified grounds that cover the business needs. And it's worth noting as well that if you do agree a home working change under a contract, under a flexible working request decision, then you need to be aware that the change that you're making is to the employee's terms and conditions, and that that change is permanent unless you do agree otherwise. Okay, so what are some of the legal and contractual changes if you're varying an employee's contract, or considerations if you are attempting to bring on a home-based working employee? So, place of work and hours. So an employee's written particulars, which is more commonly known as a contract of employment, should always specify on which days the employee will work from home and whether or not they need to obtain line manager approval before changing those days, whether that be permanently or temporary. It should also state in the contract if the employee is expected to work from home at times that differ from their normal office-based working arrangements. So it should state whether there's a requirement to work fixed hours and what period of time that covers, or whether there's going to be some daily flexibility as to the number of hours that need to be worked in that day, but with a stipulation of a requirement to be contactable by telephone or at certain times, or to dial in for certain online team meetings. Or instead, whether there aren't going to be any defined contractual hours, but instead a requirement to achieve a certain output, which is what Kay alluded to earlier. Whatever option you go with, it's important for both the line manager and the home worker to bear in mind that the working time legislation applies to home workers as it does to all employees. So this legislation effectively provides that it's the employer's responsibility to ensure that workers don't work excessive hours, currently defined as 48 hours per week. That is, unless they have expressly agreed in writing to opt out of this. Therefore, we would suggest that it would be prudent for managers to discuss this matter with the employee and impose a maximum number of hours that they may work. Whatever is agreed, whatever is decided, the overarching rule surrounding all of it is that it should be written and clearly documented in the employee's employment contract. Okay, so what are some of the other considerations? So provision of equipment and costs. So if the employer provides the employee with office and systems equipment, such as a computer, desk, chair, telephone, printer, etc. It should ensure that the employee has been trained to use it properly. Alternatively, you could go down the what you call BYOD route, which stands for bring your own device. And this is something that we see more and more clients doing, where they provide a financial allowance and contractually expect employees to provide their own devices and equipment. So that's an alternative option. The employer should stipulate that the employee should use the equipment only for business purposes, and to make it clear that the employee is under a duty of care for that equipment, and obviously would need to report any faults or any damage as soon as it's reasonably practicable. It's also advisable for the employer to ask the employee to sign an agreement that identifies the equipment that has been loaned or provided, and states that they will return it to the employer on termination of the employment. Another consideration, the employees, whether to provide a mobile phone for employees or not, or to install a separate house landline, obviously to ensure that work calls can be kept separate from personal calls. The employer should check that the employee has a broadband connection that's fast enough to deal with for business purposes, and also reliable enough for them to be able to carry out their work effectively. There should also consider an agreement about which party will bear any costs arising out of the home working arrangement in relation to equipment and provisions. So telephone, broadband charges, the increased electricity costs, printer paper, toner cartridges, ergonomic chairs. The list can be indefinite, and it's helpful to have a clear policy or contractual term in place to make sure that who is responsible financially or otherwise for each point it is clearly defined. Okay, insurance. Okay, so again, the written particulars or contract of employment should specify who's responsible for insuring the employer's equipment when it's in the employee's home. So specifically, the employee would need to check whether or not they need to inform the household insurer of their new home working arrangements. That's likely to be the case. A general household insurance policy isn't likely to cover expensive business equipment or the employee's liability if someone's hurt when visiting their home for business reasons, for example. So higher premiums are likely to be payable in this instance when the employee's home is being used for business purposes, and the parties should agree from the outset who's going to bear this additional cost. Employees who are using their own equipment for work purposes should also check whether or not such use is covered by the household insurance policy. So a few considerations there. Okay.
Health and safety, everyone's favourite. I know that there is another speaker talking about ergonomics, so we're going to wish through this one from a HR perspective. And broadly, that means that employers have a general duty regarding the health and safety of employees, whether they are on site or at home. So far, again, as is reasonably practicable, employees must take reasonable care of their own health and safety, and that of any others that might be affected whilst at work. And they need to cooperate with the employer on health and safety issues. So specifically, it is their responsibility to report any employment-related hazards to their health that may be in the home, and that includes the equipment that they use, and they must inform them if they have any issues, such as back pain, if they're working at their desk, or if any of their equipment develops a fault. We always encourage employers to carry out risk assessments of employees at home. They can do their own, but they must be trained to do so. There's several online courses available that are fairly cheap to purchase, and that ensures that the employee is fully trained and able to complete their own risk assessment, and you can then receive a certificate at the end of it. It's really important during that risk assessment that they identify any potential hazards that are present and assess the extent of the risks that might present themselves and how those risks can be managed to comply with health and safety law. It's, as I say, their responsibility, but we always advise an employer to retain the contractual right to visit the employee's home in certain circumstances, and this might be one, so to resolve any issues that they've identified in a risk assessment so that they can be addressed proactively. And ideally, if somebody's working from home, we would encourage them to have a separate study or an room set aside to work in that's large enough to accommodate all their necessary furniture and equipment. If the employee is bringing in their own devices, that those are also encompassed in the risk assessment process.
Okay. Data security and confidentiality, another very exciting topic, but one that requires some serious consideration when you're looking at remote working or home-based working practices. So because employees who work from home, just like they would in the office, are likely to have access to a large amount of both computer and paper-based confidential information that belongs to their employer, and possibly also data relating to clients and colleagues. This information clearly needs to be properly protected, as there are legal obligations in place on behalf of you as the employer to ensure that it does. The first step to that would be to have an up-to-date and detailed GDPR and confidentiality policy in place. So there should be clear rules under these of the use of company computer systems and personal devices, and the storage of both electronic and what we call hard copy data. So where appropriate, the employer should provide the employee with a lockable filing cabinet and shredder to dispose of any sensitive paperwork. Be a good first step. The employer should also make clear that such information confidential information shouldn't be accessible to families or visitors of the home worker, which obviously presents an increased risk when an employee is using their own home for business purposes. Quite often parents share tablets with their children, or can leave their laptops open and don't think to lock them when they're not in public places. So it's the employee's responsibility to take reasonable care to ensure to ensure the safety and security of the confidential information that they have access to in their own home. So the employer will need to ensure that any computer network and backup systems are safe for home workers. That's another consideration. And that data is also, there's a system for data to be backed up on a regular basis by the employee. And that there's a secure method for the transfer of data also between the employee's home and the office. And also the necessary antivirus software is installed on any computers or mobile devices that are being used by employees at home, and obviously that the antivirus is kept up to date. Okay.
So this is a contentious one. I mean, it's been a challenge for home workers with the schools being closed, but home working should not normally be an opportunity for employees to care for children or any other dependents. And it's really crucial for well-being that home workers can separate domestic and work activities. So an employer might wish to provide in the contract of employment that the employee must not have any caring responsibilities within their stated working hours, or that their ongoing caring responsibilities must not conflict with work activities. And the employee has a responsibility to inform family and friends about home working arrangements to ensure that their interruptions are kept to a minimum during the day.
Okay. So what are the miscellaneous bits to consider or to include in any home working agreement or employment contract that covers home working? The employer should ensure that there is a contractual right. This is pretty key, to insist that the employee comes into the office as and when required to meet business needs. So this might be for the purpose of training, to undertake a performance appraisal, to attend a disciplinary or a grievance hearing, to see a client, to attend a team meeting or any other business meetings, or any other operational reasons that you may have. These should be clearly stipulated in writing in some form. The employer should also clarify who will bear the travel and other costs incurred. and this will usually be the employee. So we're talking a situation of mileage here. I've had a number of clients recently that have wanted to offer an employment contract to a new employee with home-based, with home-based as the employee's primary work location, but hasn't considered the fact that effectively means from the minute the employee leaves the house, whether it's to attend the office or anywhere else, the employer is immediately responsible for paying that employee's mileage. So a budget should be taken into account to accompany that agreement.
Okay. So that covers the main points in terms of what you need to put in writing. And I think Becky, as our key HR specialist, would agree that we recommend seeking professional advice to do so, because there's a number of, I guess it's potential pitfalls that are very easy to overcome if you have the right HR support in place to advise you as to how to write that up. We're going to move on now to the ongoing management of home workers, which is also something that falls under the human resources banner, of course, to be able to manage the ongoing well-being and performance of your home workers. So the first bit we're going to talk about is support. And this is a key one, because the workload and performance standards of a home worker should be equivalent to those in their comparable office-based roles. And the home worker should be informed and of the objectives of any performance monitoring standards. And the measures that you're taking should be the same for everybody in the organisation. They must be kept in the loop. They must understand how they can be communicated with. And I think I put in this slide, without relying on email, one of the typical pitfalls to fall into is relying on written comms, which can easily be misinterpreted and can easily lead to people feeling isolated and out of the loop. So in order to effectively keep someone in the loop and make sure that they're being treated fairly with their office-based colleagues, they need to be spoken with on all sorts of different medias, email being one, but it might be Zoom calls, phone calls. Really important to keep them included on social occasions and allow time in your meetings when they're Zoom based for some informal conversation at the beginning to build in the mechanisms for team camaraderie. The most important thing is to respect the boundaries, which can become very quickly very blurred for a home worker. The ability to cut off from work and have home life needs to be respected by both the manager and the employee, so that there isn't that blurring which can lead to poor health. Okay. All right. So effective management in terms of performance. The key thing here is to have a clear plan that is agreed by both the home worker and the employer, the manager. It needs to have specific and achievable targets with defined timescales to enable you to manage through output rather than by presence, as we spoke about right at the beginning. It's important at the outset and on an ongoing basis to explain the standards that need to be adhered to and achieved, and any of the procedures that need to be followed for quality purposes. And we mustn't overlook the need for appraisals. It can't be a case of out of sight, out of mind. You need to make sure that you're regularly checking in for those performance-focused conversations, and ensure critically that they are not overlooked when there are prospects for career progression just because they are at home. When you're considering in the first instance a home working scenario, talk to them about their own self-motion and self-discipline. I think it's important to acknowledge that not all people have the necessary resilience to be able to home work, and that's a reasonable concern for an employer to have. And it's also really important to be very open about any training needs, because it might be that these are less easy to spot and pick up for a manager while somebody's working at home.
Okay, so really just to follow on from that point just made by Kay, the first step really, if you are an employer considering home working arrangements for employees, is to consider both the job role and the person in question that undertakes that role. Some jobs are clearly more suited to home working than others, and the success or otherwise of a home working arrangement will depend on whether on both whether the job is suited to work in a home working environment, but will also depend on whether the particular person who undertakes that job role holds the right personal qualities. So as Kay said, self-motivation and reliability, and the skills and the experience to be relatively self-reliant. not all employees and not all jobs are suited to home working, and not all employees are suited to working for long periods of time on their own, as a home working agreement would require. So that would be my first step. Trialing it, adopting a trial period with any staff members that you are considering transferring to home-based working, and allowing a provision to return to the office if the trial isn't successful, and agreeing what success or a lack of success looks like with the employee from the outset. The key behind all of this is to implement a home working policy that covers all the detail behind everything we've said so far, and to share it with your employees again from the outset. It ensures consistency throughout the business, but not only that, the employees really understand what's expected of them if they're going to undertake work from home. One of our other suggestions would be that you, as an employer, you adopt what we call an EAP system, so an employee assistance program. And these are provided by companies such as Perkbox, you might have seen advertised, and they offer, as well as a number of perks to the employee, they also usually offer free and confidential counselling to employees who have personal or work-related problems. And it just provides that additional someone to speak to in a situation where isolated work is starting to become a little bit too much. And lastly, cloud-based HR software. We utilise this quite a lot with our clients, and one of our most successful clients already operates a 100% remote working practice. And she utilises a cloud-based system which allows her and all of her staff to manage all of their employee files and documentation from one place, which increases obviously access and transparency and accountability for keeping documentation and files up to date. So that's a really good tool, online tool, to have in place if you are going to move to a remote working based practice with your workforce. So they would be some of the first things that I would consider putting in place if you're considering this step. Okay.
Should we bring our faces back in?
Yeah.
Oh. Hello, that's not us.
Yeah. Okay. There we are.
There we are.
We're still here.
We're still here.
Okay, so that was, I mean, it's quite a dry subject area, but it is what it is, and we've covered as much detail as we can some of the key points that we have been talking to clients about in recent months, and I'm sure will be for the next few. If you want some more information, if you want to chat anything over with us, you can contact us at hello@peasinapodconsulting.org.uk or Google us.
Or you can use the app that I know that you will be set up on to do the actual conference. I know there's chat rooms and we're on there, so please feel free to ping us.
Yeah.
I think probably the critical point around that is there's a lot of information. We've put as much of that information as possible into the slides so that you actually have something to refer to and reflect upon. But we do offer free consultations, and that's part of our firm belief that HR support should be accessible and affordable. We're very happy for you to make use of that. So please do get in touch for just a free conversation around your needs, or if you have any interest in looking at cloud-based HR systems, because that's something that we set up for people.
We do. Okay. Lovely to speak to you all today, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.